The human mind is an ancient and fathomless landscape, a wilderness of thought and will, where shadows dance with light, where whispers of control and liberation have echoed since the dawn of consciousness. To trace the secret history of mind control is to embark on a journey through time's hidden corridors, where sorcerers and scientists alike have sought dominion over the intangible realms of perception, belief, and desire. It is a tale woven into the very fabric of civilization, from the incantations of Babylonian priests to the algorithmic manipulations of the digital age, a story not merely of power, but of the eternal struggle between autonomy and influence, between the seen and the unseen hands that shape reality. Consider for a moment the oldest spells ever uttered, words murmured over clay idols or carved into temple walls, designed to bend the will of gods and mortals alike. These were not mere superstitions, but early experiments in psychology, crude yet potent attempts to harness the forces of suggestion and ritual. The ancient world understood something we have only recently begun to quantify, that the mind is a malleable thing, susceptible to symbols, to repetition, to the slow and insistent pressure of narrative. The Egyptian Heka, the Grecian Goetia, the whispered prayers of shamans, all were early blueprints of influence. The first drafts of a science that would evolve in secrecy, passed down through mystery schools and clandestine orders, refined in the laboratories of kings and spies. And yet, mind control is not merely a relic of antiquity. It is the silent undercurrent of modernity, the unspoken architecture behind politics, advertising, and even our most intimate digital interactions. The same principles that once animated the curses of old now hum through the servers of social media, where attention is harvested and behaviors are shaped with algorithmic precision. The spells have simply been translated into code, the rituals into data streams. What was once the domain of priests and alchemists is now the realm of psychologists and programmers, all seeking the same elusive mastery, the ability to bypass reason and speak directly to the subconscious. But beneath the surface of this grand narrative lies a deeper, almost cosmic truth. The question of free will itself. Are we ever truly in control, or are we all, to some degree, shaped by forces beyond our perception? The history of mind control forces us to confront the unsettling possibility that the self is not an immutable fortress, but a shifting mosaic of influences, some benevolent, others insidious. It compels us to ask, where does persuasion end and manipulation begin? Where does culture stop and conditioning start? The answers are not simple, for they reside in the liminal spaces between myth and science, between the individual and the collective hypnosis we call society. This exploration is not merely an academic exercise, but a mirror held up to the modern soul. To understand mind control is to awaken to the invisible strings that may tug at our decisions, to recognize the echoes of ancient spells in the slogans of politicians and the design of our smartphones. It is to see, perhaps for the first time, the full spectrum of influence, from the crude coercion of torture to the velvet-gloved seduction of behavioral economics, and in seeing, to reclaim a measure of sovereignty over our own minds. So let us begin this journey not with fear, but with the curiosity of explorers charting unknown territories. For the secret history of mind control is, in many ways, the secret history of humanity itself. Our fears, our desires, our endless quest to shape and be shaped by the world around us. It is a story written in the language of power, but also of resistance, of control, but also of the unbreakable sparks of individuality that persist even in the darkest labyrinths of influence. At the heart of the secret history of mind control lies a paradox as old as human thought itself, the simultaneous desire to influence and the yearning to remain free from influence. This tension pulses through every era, every culture, every system of power, like a hidden rhythm beneath the cacophony of history. To grasp the core themes of this vast and shadowed narrative, we must first recognize that mind control is not a singular, monolithic force, but a spectrum of techniques, philosophies, and unconscious mechanisms that range from the overt to the subliminal, from the ceremonial to the scientific. One of the most enduring themes is the power of belief, the alchemical process by which an idea, once implanted, can reshape reality. Ancient oracles spoke in riddles, knowing that ambiguity invites the mind to fill in the gaps, to weave its own interpretations, and in doing so, to become complicit in its own persuasion. The Delphic priestess did not command. She hinted, she evoked, she allowed the seeker's own psyche to construct meaning. This principle, refined over millennia, finds its echo in modern propaganda, where the most effective messages are not those shouted but those implied, inviting the audience to connect the dots themselves. The mind, when it believes it has arrived at an idea independently, clings to it with far greater tenacity than if it had been forced upon it. Closely intertwined with belief is the ritualization of control, the use of repetition, symbolism, and heightened emotional states to bypass critical thought. The initiations of mystery cults, the rhythmic chanting of medieval monks, the relentless sloganeering of political campaigns, all operate on the same neurological principle, that the human brain, when exposed to patterned stimuli, begins to sync with them, like a tuning fork resonating to a dominant frequency. Ritual creates a trance, and in that trance, the boundaries of the self grow porous. Today, this same mechanism is harnessed by advertisers who craft jingles that linger in the mind like earworms, by social media platforms that train users through variable rewards, and by intelligence agencies that employ sensory deprivation or overload to break down resistance. Yet perhaps the most insidious theme is the illusion of autonomy, the way systems of control often mask themselves as liberation. The Renaissance magus claimed to summon demons in the name of knowledge. The Enlightenment philosopher spoke of rationality while constructing new systems of social conditioning. The Silicon Valley visionary promises connection while designing platforms that addict and isolate. This is the hall of mirrors at the center of the mind control labyrinth. The more convinced we are of our own agency, the less we question the architectures that shape our choices. The greatest trick of influence is to make its presence invisible, to make the cage feel like open sky. Beneath these themes runs a deeper current, the duality of human nature. For every technique of control, there exists a counter-technique of awakening. For every spell, an antidote. The same brain that can be hypnotized can also achieve hyperlucidity. The same psyche that absorbs propaganda can learn to deconstruct it. This is why the history of mind control is not a linear march toward greater oppression, but a pendulum swing between coercion and resistance, between the will to dominate and the will to be free. The ancient mystics who sought to control minds also sought to transcend them. The modern scientists who engineer persuasion are often the same ones who map the pathways to mindfulness. To study these themes is not to descend into paranoia, but to awaken to the fluidity of the self. The mind is neither a fortress nor an open vault. It is a living, adapting system, shaped by forces seen and unseen. Recognizing this is the first step toward discernment, toward the ability to navigate a world where influence is the very currency of power. The secret history of mind control, then, is not just a chronicle of manipulation, but a mirror reflecting our deepest questions. What does it mean to think freely? And in a world of endless persuasion, how do we reclaim the sovereignty of our own minds? There is a story told in certain esoteric traditions of a king who sought absolute dominion over his subjects, not merely their bodies, but their very thoughts. He summoned his court magicians and demanded they craft a spell so potent it would weave itself into the dreams of his people, ensuring their loyalty not through fear, but through the subtler chords of desire. The magicians labored for years, distilling the essence of symbols, the cadence of hymns, the colors of banners, until at last they presented their creation, a tapestry, shimmering with threads of gold and crimson, depicting the king as a radiant deity. "Hang this in the central square," they instructed, "and let the people gaze upon it daily." The king did so, and in time, his image became inseparable from their longing for protection, for meaning, until dissent became not just treason, but a kind of sacrilege. The tapestry, of course, was merely cloth and dye. The real magic lay in the alchemy of repetition and symbol, in the slow grafting of myth onto memory. This allegory, like all enduring myths, is a prism refracting deeper truths about mind control. It reminds us that the most effective systems of influence rarely announce themselves as coercion. They cloak themselves in art, in ritual, in the language of shared identity. Consider the parallel in modern times, the corporate logo that becomes a tribal sigil, the political figure whose likeness is superimposed onto the archetype of the hero, the news cycle that frames reality not through lies, but through relentless selection and emphasis. The methods have evolved, but the underlying sorcery remains the same, the transmutation of perception through narrative alchemy. Another symbolic narrative emerges from the lore of the golem, the clay servant animated by sacred Hebrew incantations. The golem, though mighty, was a hollow vessel, obeying only the letter of its master's commands, not their spirit. Without the balancing force of the divine name, the Shem, it would grow mindlessly violent, a slave to its programming. Here we find an eerie premonition of modern algorithmic control, where vast systems of behavioral manipulation operate without true understanding, reducing human complexity to data points. The social media feed that radicalizes, the recommendation engine that leads users deeper into obsession, these are the golems of our age, powerful but soulless, executing their coded mandates without comprehension of the chaos they unleash. The warning in the tale is clear: control without wisdom becomes its own kind of possession. Then there is the lesser-known but profoundly revealing Pacific myth of the ghost canoe. Islanders spoke of phantom vessels that would appear to lost fishermen, their prows carved with hypnotic spirals. To gaze too long upon these patterns was to fall into a trance, compelling the viewer to paddle ever further into open ocean, away from home. The parallels to contemporary attention economics are inescapable. The infinite scroll, the autoplay, the deliberately addictive design of digital interfaces that lure us away from tangible reality into endless psychic drift. The ghost canoe is no mere superstition. It is a metaphor for any system that hijacks our orienting instincts, replacing true navigation with the illusion of discovery while quietly steering us toward predetermined waters. Perhaps the most poignant symbolic narrative comes from the Sufi tradition, where a disciple, desperate for enlightenment, begs his master for the ultimate secret of existence. The master leads him to a still pond and bids him look. "What do you see?" "Only my reflection," the disciple replies. The master waits as ripples disturb the surface. "Now what do you see?" The disciple frowns. "Nothing clear, just broken images." The master nods. This is the state of most minds, agitated by unseen forces, reflecting only fragments. But when the water is still, he cups his hands, lifts a portion of the pond and drinks. Then it becomes not just a mirror, but sustenance. This simple parable encapsulates the antidote to mind control, the cultivation of inner stillness. Just as disturbed water cannot reflect truth, a psyche bombarded by manipulation cannot perceive clearly. The history of influence is, in this light, also the history of meditation, of prayer, of all technologies of mental clarity that allow humans to distinguish self from suggestion. The modern resurgence of mindfulness practices amid the frenzy of digital culture is no accident. It is the ancient immune response of consciousness recognizing its own colonization. These symbolic narratives, the king's tapestry, the runaway golem, the ghost canoe, the pond's reflection, are not mere antiquated fables. They are living maps to understanding how influence operates on the deepest levels of human experience. They reveal that mind control is never just about information, but about identity, not merely about what we think, but who we believe ourselves to be while thinking it. To engage with these stories is to arm oneself with something older and more subversive than any propaganda, the ability to recognize patterns, to see the strings before they become attached. The true test of any esoteric knowledge lies in its translation into the tangible, the moment when cosmic insights descend from the realm of theory and touch the rough texture of everyday life. Understanding the secret history of mind control is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is an awakening that must ripple outward, altering how we navigate the streets of our own existence. For what good is recognizing the strings if we do not learn to either sever them or dance with awareness of their pull? Consider first the most pervasive arena of modern influence, the digital landscape. Social media platforms and search engines have become the new temples of attention, where algorithms, priests of the machine age, curate reality with eerie precision. These systems thrive on the very principles ancient sorcerers once used: repetition, emotional arousal, the subtle manipulation of self-perception. The like button is no different from the hypnotist's swinging watch, training users to seek validation in predetermined ways. But knowledge of this mechanism grants power. Simply recognizing that infinite scroll exploits our biological craving for novelty allows us to reclaim agency. Practical resistance begins with small acts of rebellion, turning off notifications, scheduling digital fasts, questioning why certain content provokes strong emotions. These are not mere lifestyle choices, but acts of psychic self-defense, the modern equivalent of hanging garlic to ward off vampires. In the political sphere, the tools of mass persuasion have grown frighteningly sophisticated. The same behavioral science that helps marketers sell sneakers is deployed to engineer consent for policies or wars. Here, the lesson from history is clear. The most effective propaganda rarely looks like propaganda. It resembles entertainment, or education, or even dissent. A practical inoculation against such manipulation involves cultivating what the ancients called discernment, the ability to trace ideas back to their roots. When a narrative evokes visceral reactions, pause. Ask who benefits from your anger or your fear. Follow the money, yes, but also follow the symbolism. What archetypes are being activated? The wise parent? The menacing outsider? The heroic leader? Real-world critical thinking in the age of mind control means learning to decode the mythic subtext beneath the surface of news cycles. On an interpersonal level, every conversation carries the potential for subtle influence. Sales techniques, negotiation tactics, even the phrasing of requests often employ covert NLP, neuro-linguistic programming strategies derived from hypnosis research. The clerk who says, "Will you be paying with cash or credit?" has already presupposed your purchase, a linguistic nudge toward compliance. Recognizing these micro-manipulations allows for more conscious engagement. One might reframe the question in their mind, they're using an alternative choice architecture, and respond accordingly. This is not paranoia but pragmatism, an understanding that human communication has always been a dance of suggestion and counter-suggestion. Perhaps the most profound practical implication lies in self-observation. Ancient mystery schools taught initiates to know thyself, precisely because an unexamined mind is vulnerable to external programming. Modern psychology confirms this. Our unconscious biases, traumas, and unmet needs create invisible openings for manipulation. A person unaware of their abandonment wounds might be easily controlled through fear of rejection. Someone starved for recognition could be led astray by flattery. Thus, the most potent defense against mind control is ruthless self-honesty, regular introspection to map one's own psychic weak points. Meditation, journaling, or therapy become not just wellness practices, but armor-forging rituals in an age of pervasive influence. The workplace, too, operates as a microcosm of these dynamics. Corporate culture, team-building exercises, even office layouts are designed to shape behavior and loyalty. The Japanese concept of nemawashi, laying the groundwork for consensus, and the Western open office concept both represent subtle forms of social engineering. Practical resistance doesn't necessarily mean rejection. It might mean conscious participation with eyes wide open. Understanding that the company retreats, trust falls are modern variants of tribal bonding rituals allows one to engage strategically rather than reactively. Ultimately, the real-world integration of this knowledge culminates in a radical reclamation of attention. In medieval times, alchemists sought the prima materia, the base substance from which all transformation began. Today, our prima materia is attention itself. Every notification, advertisement, or piece of propaganda is ultimately battling for this precious resource. Practical sovereignty begins with budgeting attention like currency, investing it deliberately rather than spending it impulsively. This might mean physically rearranging environments to reduce temptations, or learning the art of attention hygiene, rituals to cleanse the mind of parasitic thoughts, much as our ancestors used smoke and salt for spiritual purification. The implications extend beyond personal benefit to collective empowerment. Communities that understand these principles can develop mental immune systems, shared practices for identifying and neutralizing manipulative narratives. Historical precedents exist. The samizdat underground publications that circumvented Soviet censorship, the African-American tradition of signifying as coded resistance. Modern equivalents might include encrypted messaging for activists or meme warfare as a tool for counter-propaganda. The key realization is that mind control loses power when exposed to sunlight. Shared literacy in its mechanisms creates societal antibodies. This is not a call to retreat from the modern world, but to engage with it more skillfully, to wield knowledge as both shield and lens. The grocery store layout designed to maximize impulse buys becomes transparent. The political speech heavy with loaded language reveals its architecture. The viral TikTok trend shows its behavioral conditioning blueprint. And in this transparency, freedom grows, not absolute freedom, for no mind develops in isolation, but the freedom of the dancer who knows the steps, rather than the puppet jerked by unseen strings. We stand now at the crossroads of history and consciousness, where the ancient and the algorithmic converge. The journey through the secret history of mind control has led us through temple corridors and corporate boardrooms, across battlefields of ideology and the intimate frontiers of our own skulls. What began as an exploration of external manipulation must culminate in an inward revolution. For the true battlefield has always been the shimmering, malleable fabric of human awareness itself. The grand revelation is this: mind control is not something done to us by shadowy others, but a fundamental condition of being human. From the moment our ancestors first gathered around fires and found themselves enchanted by a storyteller's words, to the present day when our neural pathways are mapped and monetized, the human experience has been one of perpetual influence. The difference between slavery and sovereignty lies not in escaping this reality, but in awakening to it with eyes wide open. Like the first fish to recognize it was swimming in water, our power begins with the simple, seismic realization that we have been immersed all along in invisible currents of persuasion. This recognition carries transformative potential. When we understand that every advertisement is a secular spell, every political slogan a linguistic sigil, every social media platform a digital dream temple, we attain what the alchemists called theoria, not just knowledge, but participatory wisdom. The conspiracy theorist screams about puppeteers. The enlightened recognize the strings, but also the scissors. Those scissors take many forms. The pause between stimulus and response, the questioning of emotional reactions, the deliberate cultivation of mental stillness amid the storm. Our epoch demands a new kind of warrior, not one who fights with swords or guns, but with attention and discernment. The mystic G.I. Gurdjieff spoke of the war against sleep, and never has this battle been more urgent. In an age where your refrigerator might surveil you and your wristwatch nudge your behavior, resistance takes subtler forms. It looks like the courage to sit in silence without digital pacifiers. It sounds like asking who benefits from this emotion when outrage sweeps through your social feeds. It feels like the delicious subversion of going for a walk without documenting it, of thinking a thought that wasn't first suggested to you by an algorithm. The call to transformation is both personal and collective. On the individual level, it requires building what might be called a mind garden, a carefully tended inner space where ideas are examined before being allowed to take root. Regular practices become essential: media fasting, source triangulation, the study of logical fallacies and rhetorical devices. These are the modern equivalents of the warrior's daily drills. But beyond self-defense, there is the higher calling of becoming what the ancient Egyptians termed a true of voice, one whose words and actions arise from authentic being rather than programmed responses. Collectively, our task is to create cultural antibodies. Just as the printing press broke the monopoly of medieval gatekeepers, new technologies can serve emancipation if wielded wisely. Imagine social networks designed to cultivate critical thinking rather than addiction, schools that teach neuro-linguistic self-defense alongside mathematics, art that exposes manipulation even as it entertains. The underground rivers of esoteric knowledge, once guarded by initiates, must now flow into the public commons, for the tools of control have been democratized, and so too must the tools of liberation. This is not about rejecting influence wholesale. That would be both impossible and undesirable. Culture is conversation. Society is symbiosis. The goal is not some sterile isolation, but conscious participation, to drink from the well of human connection without becoming poisoned by its contaminants. Like the Sufi who dances in ecstasy yet remains aware of each step, we must learn to engage with the world's persuasions while keeping our center intact. As we conclude this journey, remember, the most subversive act in an age of mind control is to become ungovernable in the most profound sense, not through rebellion against externals, but through absolute allegiance to your own awakened consciousness. They can implant ideas in your mind, but only you can grant them the keys to your soul. The spells lose power when you stop reciting them unconsciously. The algorithms falter when you cease to react predictably. The ancient and modern machineries of influence grind to a halt before the individual who knows themselves. So go forth with this double-edged knowledge that you have always been influenced and that you are infinitely more powerful than you imagine. Carry both truths together like the twin serpents of the caduceus and let their tension propel you upward. The secret history was never just about control. It was always about the indomitable human spirit that, when awakened, can never be fully controlled again. Here, at Journey's End, we find our starting point renewed. Your next thought, your next choice, your next moment of attention. These are the frontiers where the true history of liberation begins.